Hey, what's good? It's your boy MC. Welcome to another episode of the Vocal Minority Report. As always, you could have downloaded any podcast in the world, but you're here with us. We appreciate that. Man, it feels good to say that it's literally been 2 months since I recorded one of these and connected with my people, let alone a guest. So we've got a great show for you today, a great guest from a great podcast. And since so many of you like podcasts, obviously, I know you like listening to people talk, and some of you are like me, stopped reading years ago. So because of that, we have Audible now, and you can go there and get a free audiobook, right? And a 30-day trial while supporting the show. Go to audibletrial.com/vocal report for your free audiobook and 30-day trial. They've got over 180,000 titles to choose from, including some from our previous guests. Speaking of previous guests, why not go to thevocalminorityReport.com for all previous episodes, guest info, our store. You can take our quick anonymous survey under contribute, and much, much more. Don't forget to go to iTunes, subscribe, leave a rating and a review. Really a good way to get us noticed. You can download previous episodes anywhere you get your podcasts, like Google Play and Stitcher. All right, here's the show.
Previously on the Vocal Minority.
Are you part of the silent majority? Or are you part of the vocal minority?
Motherfuckers, go.
Attention, please.
If America can be saved, and I don't know if it's too late, but it'll be through a radio show. Like this new kind.
This shit here feels like a whole entire world collapse.
The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers.
It's the vocal minority.
The revolution will be live.
Hello?
Hey, how's it going, man? Hello.
Good.
Let's talk to the creator and host of the podcast Risk, comedian, writer, teacher, and master storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the great Kevin Allison to the show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here.
Hey, it's good to have you. I think this is our take 2 or 3 now, but
It's no problem. These long distance calls can be tough.
no doubt. Which is, why it sucks that I didn't get to see you in person when you were here in Dallas a couple weeks ago. But as we discussed, you were here putting on a great show. So I want to talk about that because I love storytellers. And that's part of what we do here when we want to talk to directors and writers and authors and whomever else. But, what you do is so unique. So I hate that I didn't get to see it in person.
Oh, yeah. We had a phenomenal show in Dallas. We were at the Sons of Herman Hall, which is a pretty cool old place. And what Risk is all about is we say it's where people tell true stories they never thought they'd dare to share in public. And the podcast has been around since 2009. We now get over 2 million downloads per month.
Okay.
And what it is it's kind of like, you might have heard of some storytelling shows like The Moth or This American Life. It's kind of like those shows that are on NPR, except that it's way, way, way uncensored. So unlike those radio shows, we are okay with people talking about really intimate sexual stuff or
Right.
really shocking violent stuff or really emotional, like traumatic sort of stuff. So it's all over the map. An evening of Risk is usually, it goes from absolutely like gut-bustingly hilarious to, oh my God, tears coming down your face because you can't believe someone's being so honest about something. There was a woman named Marcy who shared a story at the very last story that was shared at our Dallas show a couple weeks ago. It's going to be on the next episode of Risk, which will go up, February, whatever that date is going to be. It'll be up, February 7th it'll be up. And, oh my God, it was just such a great example of a great Risk story. It was about how her 12-year-old daughter, who was way of an extrovert, super fun, like way into musical theater and just a joy of a girl, suddenly lost her personality and became super, super suicidal.
Oh, wow.
And it was the most mysterious and bizarre and frightening thing for the family. It was about a year and a half that they were dealing with the fact that their child's personality just totally changed. No emotions whatsoever, until they finally realized that it was a certain sort of cyst that she had developed, which was screwing with her brain chemistry.
Oh, okay.
So it's a story that starts out hilarious and then ends up just kind of horrifying. And then in the end, it's super, like, you shed a tear from how inspiring it is. And that's like typical Risk. That's what we do.
Well, good. I want to get into about kind of how you get that out of people, and just kind of that being bold, and then also just kind of the vulnerability being vulnerable. There we go. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, what we do is, for example, we put out a call on the podcast. We'll say, hey, Dallas, we're coming into town in about 3 or 4 months. So start pitching us your stories. And we'll have a theme for the night. It'll be something like, rage or euphoria or family or something like that, right? So we'll get about 20 pitches, right? That people will write in, oh, I'd love to tell a story about how I almost overdosed on heroin, or, oh, I have a hilarious story about how I crapped my pants on a date, or something like that. And we'll go through all of these, and we'll try to narrow it down to about 8 and ask those 8 people to send us recordings so we can really hear them going into this in detail.
Okay.
Then we'll narrow it down to 4, and we'll start really working with those 4. We'll get on the phone with them, we'll hear it, and we kind of work a little bit, there's 2 things, like myself and my staff, our background is in theater and writing, right? Some of us are from the world of, fiction writing, and some of us are from the world of film and television. So we have a lot of that sort of coaching experience as far as how to put a story together and how to, add some oomph to it theatrically.
Gotcha.
But there's another aspect that comes into it because of the nature of Risk's stories, and that is, we're not trained therapists, but oftentimes we kind of have to be somewhat of a therapist when we're talking to people, because we're really poking at them. We'll have to push them to, we'll say things like, oh, but tell me just a little bit more about why you had those feelings about your mother and that kind of thing. And, it'll start to really open up new layers in a story.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I think it's kind of twofold there, where, there's something about the power of storytelling in general, but then there's also the power of being heard, right? So,
oh God, yeah. You're absolutely right that it's twofold. That people do the show, and they have the impression that, oh, this is going to be like a verbal selfie. It's just going to be me. Then you get up there and you realize, oh no, this is really, really like, I'm giving something here. I'm offering something to my fellow human beings by really revealing some of this stuff about myself. And then what happens is that the listeners start responding. Like, we get emails every single day from people saying, oh my gosh, I was on the verge of committing suicide, and then I heard your show, and the way so-and-so expressed this thing about what they had been through, I thought I was the only one in the world. Those kinds of emails just constantly come at us. We were in Austin, for example, right before we came to Dallas, and a woman came up to me after the show. She was with her husband. They were so cute. And she said, we had been married for 19 years. For 19 years, and we stopped having sex, 3 years prior to that. It had just totally dried up. And we were both secretly thinking of getting divorced. Then we discovered Risk, and we heard some of the people share their kinky stories, their stories about how they discovered fetishes and stuff like bondage and discipline and stuff like that. And we heard how just unbelievably honest and frank and uncensored these people were being, and it just opened up for us. She said, I confessed to my husband, I think I'm kinky. And he said, I think I'm kinky. And then they revealed that now they've been together another 3 years and that they have sex every day.
Wow. Okay. See, look,
So,
look at risk,
it's not
saving
all people saying,
relationships.
oh, I didn't commit suicide. Sometimes it's really funny stories like that are really joyous, like people have written into us, oh my God, I decided to change my career after I started listening to your show because I heard how someone, found the guts to like quit their job and do what they really love. That kind of stuff is just really, really, there's nothing that compares to it.
Right. Yeah. Because I was going to ask you, do you find that being bold is liberating? But I think that two of the two examples you just gave, and the platform that you provide for people, strangers, if you will, there's the celebrity aspect. And then obviously there's the pseudo anonymous person who shares their story. And so I think that vulnerability is super important, but it's kind of like you don't recognize how important that is until you hear it and really engage in it, so.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that is another thing about risk. You don't have to go by your real name, and you can definitely change the names of all of the characters and locations and, any specific information like that you think might hurt someone's privacy, you can definitely change. What we're concerned about is that the emotional truth of what you're saying is accurate, right?
Okay.
So we don't really care if you're, going by your real name. What we care about is, is this really sharing something that was really meaningful to you and that you feel is very revealing to be sharing with other human beings? And, we'll be able to tell, we'll hear it in the emotion in your voice if it is.
Right. Yeah. And I wonder, like, some of them, because of the arc and the way the stories are crafted, with you all's help. And then obviously, the delivery based on the person telling it. I wonder, does the laughter help sometimes, especially in the live settings? And then also with that, have there been times when people laugh and you kind of knowing maybe where the story is headed, or just being a performer yourself, or I don't want to call you an empath, but a person who, kind of understands what's going on. Like, I wonder if that laughter, have you ever kind of cringed when it wasn't a joke, or,
That's a great question. Actually, hosting the show, I've learned over, 9 years now, is a real, there's a real art and craft to hosting the show as well. I always start by letting the audience know, hey, there are going to be some big laughs here tonight, but we're also going to go to some really difficult places where you might cry or you might gasp or you might even feel like you have to leave the room because you might feel triggered by something someone is saying. So let's all just be prepared to be as supportive and loving as we can to these storytellers. When we're about to go from a story that was really, really hilarious, just all out, just an outrageous, silly story, which, we love. And then we're going to veer into one like that one I just told you about where the woman's daughter was trying to commit suicide.
Right.
I will set the audience up and let them know, okay, we're going to switch gears now, guys. And I will let you know that, the last performer we had is a polished stand-up comedian. The next one we have, she has literally never stood on a stage and spoke to people like this before.
Okay.
So let's show her extra respect and love and support, right? And you are not kidding that, especially on our tour dates, it can be a little bit tricky because people sometimes see that we're coming from something that was written up in the newspaper and they don't quite appreciate the show. They don't quite understand just how intense the show can get. And so they might show up drunk They might, they might even be, attending a bachelorette sort of party, and they're out seeing,
Right.
thinking they're going to see a stand-up comedy sort of show because they didn't read closely enough what they were coming to. So we will sometimes have to have people removed if we feel like, oh, these people are just going to hurt the vibe
Okay.
of what's going on here. But by and large, the people who come to see the shows, they know the podcast, right? And by and large, the people who pitch us their stories, they know the podcast,
Okay,
right?
of course,
So they
right.
have already really taken in a lot of, oh my gosh, this show can go anywhere. And so they're very appreciative of that and super, super supportive. We've had a lot of people break down on stage too, where a person starts crying or just a person forgets where they are in this, a person is like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. What was I talking about? And the audience will call out, oh, you were just talking about the yada yada. And, they'll help them out.
Okay, good.
They're that supportive generally.
Okay, well, that's great. And I guess that's a good point as far as the audience, is a risk audience, if you will, especially with 9 years of history, and so you've got a big enough following, and the people who are up there. So because I've seen you say that you don't have to be a polished performer, and you can still leave an audience riveted, and I think that's fascinating, and I'm. Just because, public speaking and, still is such a fear of so many folks, and even me, I mean, it's easier doing this behind the mic, but, it's still a barrier of whatever, but doing presentations or when I'm on a conference call in my business life, I still have some heart palpitations. So,
absolutely. And it's a little bit different with everybody. Some people are more comfortable in front of a lot of people, and some people are more comfortable just one-on-one or in front of a few people as far as like presenting something or speaking about something that they really want to get across. Now, myself personally, I'm very, very comfortable in front of a lot of people, but I will get really nervous if it's a new story. If it's a brand new story that I've never told before, there really is exactly what you were talking about before. There will be places in that story where I think, well, I think this part is kind of funny. So I'm kind of expecting them to laugh at this part. And then sometimes they won't, or I'll be like, oh, I think this part is really scary.
Right.
So I'm expecting you'll be able to hear a pin drop at this point, and they might be laughing. It's a little bit hard to predict that first time you share a story, what the energy in the room might be like, and what it's just a little hard to predict. There's a lot of psychology involved in it all. So yeah, I'll be nervous the first time I present a story. And then the second and third times I'll begin to feel my sea legs with it. And then from then on, I'm just fine.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like anything else. So, and you have the unique background. You mentioned, you all's unique background as far as the people you work with. But, I know prior to Risk, you were known, and it seems like always introduced as formerly of the state. And,
right.
And for me personally, I'm not, so when I hear the state, I'm not super familiar with all due apologies. I feel like I know you guys individually, but I didn't know you collectively. But, I think you guys are funny. Like when I think of Michael Ian Black, for instance, I think of, VH1 specials, I love the 90s Reloaded and then beyond, obviously everything he's doing now. So
we formed in 1988.
Okay.
At NYU.
What do you know how old I was in 1988?
Film majors at NYU. We formed a sketch comedy group there.
Okay.
And we were super, super, super passionate. There were 11 of us. And we created a show that we presented to TV executives, in the year after we had graduated from NYU, and we landed a gig with Jon Stewart on MTV, a show called You Wrote It, You Watch It. That lasted one season, and they decided, let's give John his own show and the state their own show. So we did 30 episodes of a sketch comedy show that was just called The State on MTV.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we got too big for our britches. We decided to quit MTV and try to go for one of the big networks, CBS at that time, which was a huge mistake and kind of a disaster that went so badly and was so just such a clusterfuck that it ended up eventually breaking the group up. But we're still good friends to this day. There were definitely some very tense years between us. Some tension between the members of the group in the years around the breakup, but now we're like family again, and so you have members of, like, for example, Tom Lennon is now on The Odd Couple, which I think is on CBS.
Right, yeah, okay.
Joe Latrulio is on Brooklyn 911. Let's see.
Okay,
a lot
so
of the members were in Reno 911, that show.
Okay, that's right.
David Wayne has directed stuff like Wet Hot American Summer. And so, yeah, the state, we're all over the place doing wonderful stuff, in various different ways. No one is quite doing anything like me in the group. No, like this storytelling that can go to very emotional places is a little bit different from what most people in the group are pursuing career-wise. So it's kind of been awesome to have carved out my own niche,
Of course. I think that's really amazing, actually, especially I'm assuming because you're translating your skills being a performer and being on stage. Because were you a stand-up? Like, what was your comedy? Or were you, because
right.
I see you guys
here's the thing. It was a very strange... After the state broke up in 1996, I literally spent 12 years, what I call my in the belly of the whale period, like where I just did not know what to do to get ahead in my career. I was actually so fearful about keeping a roof over my head that I was spending most of my time doing stuff like cater waitering and, survival jobs.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I was auditioning for stuff. I was pitching shows to Comedy Central. I was doing solo shows. I was never a stand-up comedian. For some reason, speaking as myself in little riffing ways about observational stuff that didn't really all add up to something, didn't make so much sense to me, or just didn't click with me. So I never really developed that skill, the stand-up comedy skill, which is so essential for so many people's careers, because the nice thing about stand-up comedy is you just show up at a gig, you do your thing, everyone understands the format, and you're seen, and then you can run to the next gig. There are people in New York who will do, 3 or 4 gigs a night,
Yeah, I've had them on my show, right.
Their faces are all over the place, so they're getting known, they're getting lots of experience, et cetera, et cetera. What I started doing was character monologues, which were these really weird kind of theatrical, very sketch comedy-like, where a character would get up on stage for 15 or 20 minutes and tell a weird story as the character, right? And they were really, I think, they were awesome. They were really great pieces, but I think that most casting directors were like, I'm just not sure what to do with him. He's kind of far out. So it was actually Michael Ian Black who convinced me. In 2008, I did a show of characters. It was called F Up. It was 5 characters who had fucked up their careers. So it was clearly just based on, they were all autobiographical to some extent.
Right. I got you.
And I did it at San Francisco Sketch Fest, and it didn't go over well. It was just one of those nights where it just wasn't connecting, and I felt like, what am I doing? I felt like F Up described the show itself. So after the show, Michael said to me, I think most people in the audience just wished you had dropped the mask. Just drop the act and be yourself. Tell your own true stories. And I said, oh, but there's too many secret and weird parts of me, and things that I don't think people would get because they're so incongruous. Like, I'm too gay and too kinky and raunchy, and yet too friendly and polite and Midwestern, and also kind of sometimes too absurdist and bizarre, but then other times too, like, spiritual and literary and serious. And he said, I finally just said to him, it just feels too risky to get up there and be me.
Aha.
And he said,
Aha.
that's the word. He
Right.
said, if it feels risky, then you're probably opening up, so an audience will open up to you.
Okay. All
So
right.
the very next week, I tried telling a true story on stage, and that changed everything.
Wow. Okay. I'm so glad that you told that story. I've never heard it from you directly. So yeah, that's beautiful. I'm glad that's perfect. So and obviously that led to the name and everything else from an F up to taking risk and look at you now. So that's pretty awesome. You know, I wanted to talk about the story studio and your storytelling skills workshop that you have because I personally kind of need to know how to craft a better narrative arc and some trigger some emotional responses, but I know it's something that you do, to also help. So I wonder if you could tell us about the studio and your workshop and maybe just some tips for the writers and storytellers and even just people who, because like we had an episode, for instance, called "Thank You for Sharing." There was Dr. G was on our show and somehow she tricked me into telling all about a breakup and how I was feeling. It's extremely emotional 2 hours I never expected. Like
Wow.
the roles were completely reversed on that episode, and but we talked a lot about like I said the power of, because she kept saying thank you for sharing to me, like giving me that validation, and it wasn't. At first, you kind of feel condescending, and I've listened to it so much, having edited and all that. But it's like, no, I mean she was being very genuine, and obviously we talked about, like I mentioned earlier, and you said too, the power of being heard. So I say all that to say that, and we got a lot of response from that episode, and so I'm now way more into this being vulnerable, and I'm just wondering, and I don't know what you exactly teach, but even just from so anyway, I just came from Sundance too, right? And so there was a lot of people talking about, authentic storytelling, and that was a huge staple of everything I could learn there. It was, from all the directors and actors and writers and everyone, producers. It was all about, how can we, as people of color, because a lot of the panels I went to were minority, people of color, whatever. But even just outside of that, what compels folks? It's that authenticity. And I'm just, and so with that really long question to you, I wonder how you tackle that in your story studio or the workshops or just generally, we've touched on it, but quiet and let you go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Over at the we're at thestorystudio.org, and there's basically 3 types of people that we work with. We have, at this point, I don't know how many faculty members we have. There's myself, there's Cindy Freeman. We have a couple of people out in Los Angeles. We have a few more people here in New York, and we have someone in Minneapolis as well. And so in our workshops, we'll deal with 3 types of people. 1, people who want to tell stories at shows like Risk or The Moth. That's easy enough. 2, people who want to share stories in their careers, whether it be they just want to be able to speak more humanly and compellingly in job interviews or performance reviews, or when making pitches in front of a board or presentations in front of a trade group or whatever it might be, even just like cocktail chatter or having having lunch with a client and being able to kind of just like casually like walk your way through the narrative of what your brand is or a project you're working on, that sort of thing. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of corporate workshops for people like Google and GE and Citibank and places like that.
Okay.
And the third kind of person we work with is the third type of is what we call storytelling for personal growth. And those are often people who they may not have any intention of like a specific place where they want to share a story. Like they might not be thinking, oh, I want to get up on stage at Risk or The Moth, or oh, I have this presentation to do at work next week. But they may be thinking a little bit more in a self-helpy way of, oh, I would just like to kind of like take a look back at some of the incidents in my life and kind of like, work my way through them and see if I can better express myself, see if I can better take people there so that they understand me a little bit, so that I understand me a little bit better.
Right.
So that is the three categories of people that we often work with. Sometimes we'll work one-on-one with someone. They might be a preacher or a lawyer having to present a case in trial, or we'll work with an entire staff of something. Like for example, where we just did this big thing for Google for a bunch of people in Google out in San Francisco. And so, yeah, a lot of one-on-one, a lot of video. We have video courses that anyone can download and take in their own time. We'll work with people over Skype even. I just did something with a group of guys over in Portugal, and it was one of these business workshops, but I was just teaching them over Skype.
Okay.
So there's a lot of different possibilities of how you can team up with us and get some training, either face-to-face or over Skype, or just by downloading some of our video courses, and taking it in your own time. So yeah, there's an awful lot to unpack. It's mostly about recognizing that any piece of information you want to express, there's a more human way to do it, right? It's just understanding that you might have some dry facts and figures, You might have the Wikipedia explanation of something, the history of something you've been through, or, important facts about this brand that you want to communicate. But if you can reframe it so that you're talking in terms of a human being reacting to that brand or whatever. For example, instead of being like, that was the week that our whole project fell apart, so we decided we had to take a whole different route. No, instead saying, and then one morning, Jill walked in my room. Her eyes were wide. Her eyes were watering. She was shaking even. And she said to me, "Oh my God, I think the whole project just fell apart." And I said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" Right? All of a sudden, you're not just telling us about the project and the history and how this happened yet. You're not just listing an essayist sort of way of walking us through an explanation of what happened. You're showing us people being affected. You're showing the look in their eyes, the feeling you got in your gut when she said that, the sound of the tone of her voice when you were talking, the thought that ran through your head but that you didn't say out loud. You're kind of taking us there to show human beings having felt experience together. That's what makes something story-like, right? And so it's all about working on reframing things that way.
Okay, I love that. That's perfect. Yeah, reframing them to capture that same through line that we all have. That real connection. Okay, no, that's perfect. Last couple of things I have for you. I heard comedian, comedian, actress, host. She's all kinds of stuff. Aisha Tyler. She had Chris.
Mm-hmm.
She had Chris Rock on her podcast a long time ago. It's been a while now. Anyway, and so one of her questions, and I've heard her say this a lot and some other comedians, and she asked him directly, I believe. She was saying that she was talking about she was commenting on the bravery of stand-ups. And I know you're not a stand-up or we're not a stand-up, but so his response was kind of in line with mine, where it's not bravery. He said, well, it's just that they have more nerve. That's really the line there, nerve versus bravery. And I've asked other comedians this and funny people or whatever, just kind of their opinion. So I'm just curious with you, do you ever look at it in that way, like speaking out and telling your story, no matter it being stand up or whatever the kind of storytelling we're speaking of here? Do you look at, or do you draw a distinct distinction between, as we discussed, I guess, stand up and that level of comedy or storytelling that gets a laugh? So between bravery and nerve?
Yeah, I think think it's a fine distinction because, especially those people who come on to Risk who don't have a lot of experience doing this sort of thing. Like, there's a woman I'm working with right now who is working on a story with me about how in her family there was a cannibalistic sort of thing that happened, a very traumatic, a member of her family might have been engaging in cannibalism, right?
Okay,
I mean,
right.
this is like really intense and vulnerable and sensitive and freaky stuff, and I think it really does take bravery for a person like that to be like, all right, I really feel like I have to come out about this and try to make sense out of it and try to, feel if anyone might learn something from this because of, everyone's got some weird secrets in their family or some disturbing things that have happened or a family member that they're really worried about or something like that. So on an emotional level, it almost doesn't matter how strange or unfamiliar what a person is talking about is. On an emotional level, we all resonate with, oh yeah, I remember when my sister went through that super weird thing with that guy she was dating. We can all resonate emotionally on some level to almost anything that anyone's talking about.
Right.
So yes, I do think that there is a level of bravery, but what I see it as this: if you're about to get up on stage and share something that is really meaningful to you, or you're worried about how are people going to respond to this, you deal with fear. The fear is there, and then you just kind of walk through it. You know what I mean? I mean, it's really a matter of everyone has fear, and the extent to which I think people, I mean, that's the reason the show is called Risk. The whole idea is the fear is going to be there. You're going to experience the fear. It's okay to be afraid. But you know what? Err on the side of taking a risk and walking into the fear, stepping right into the thing that you fear, because more often than not, you're going, unless you're doing something that's really, really stupid and dangerous and like you should have known better. But
Right.
more often than not, if you're facing the fear about something where you're like, I don't know, I'm hesitant about this because of you're usually going to gain something from having actually taken a risk and just, bit the bullet, right? So, yeah, I think it's about seeing the fear and being with the fear and then doing it anyway.
Right. Yeah, generally you'll feel better on the other side no matter what, because sometimes it's that anxiety and whatever other terms that's what's killing you. And you can get
that's what's holding you back
right.
most of the time.
You can,
and most of the stuff that we worry about is useless worry.
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, someone told me, and this was more specific to business, worry about the things you can control. And, I'm a bit of a control freak, but a lot of that has to do with probably a lot of odd anxiety. So because of that, but trying to let go and just let it, okay, but embrace things as they come and embrace that fear. So no, I'm glad to hear you say that. Actually, no, I got one last question, then I'm done.
Sure.
So I'm going to be working on a show called She Stories, a storytelling platform for women to come together, share their stories. And I'm not the host, but I'm be producing that show. And so I think I've come up with a couple of genius benchmark questions for our guests. I want to run them by you though. So one is, what's the most important story that you've told in your life? And the other is, what's the most important story that's been told to you? And I'm just curious for you, as someone who elicits a lot of something. Should there be a little more depth in those questions? And obviously, I know you charge people to answer this kind of stuff.
Well,
but
no, first of all, those are really, really interesting questions. I've never framed it quite like that, but I might give that a try as well. One of the things that's great to know, when you're prompting people to share stories, there's no one way to do it. There are lots of great questions that you can ask people that will elicit great stories from them. One of the things that I usually do is ask people to kind of like try and think of especially emotional moments in their life. Like, for example, can you remember like the time maybe you were most embarrassed in public? Or can you think of a time when you were like so excited you didn't know what to do with yourself? Or a time that you were especially furious or especially terrified? Or, that kind of stuff will often get great stuff out of people. And another thing that sometimes is a good idea is to ask people about unexpected stuff. Like, for example, is there something you're really passionate about, but that other people just don't seem to get? Or
that's a
is
good
there
one.
something you've always felt that, you might be the only one in the world that's like that, So, questions like that can really get people's minds going.
Right.
But
Okay.
I think that that's great, too. That whole idea of thinking of what you were just talking about, like, what's a story that's meaningful to you? Like, if you were to sit down with a therapist and the therapist were to say, all right, tell me a story that you often think of as far as just like a landmark for you, what makes you you? And sometimes people will think back, oh, well, one of the first things that occurs to me is this thing that happened when I was 5 years old.
Right.
And then someone else will think, oh, well, for me, it's that horrible decision I made when I made the wrong turn in my career very early on. It's very interesting to kind of poke someone to like try to zero in on something that like will reveal to us something that, let's say if we were dating them, they might save this information for date number 3 or something,
Right, no doubt.
Now
Right.
tell me something I wouldn't have guessed about you yet, and think of an experience that it might be a little bit curious to you to this day. You think back on it and you're like, gosh, I still don't know what I think about that decision that I made, or if I could go back and do that again, would I? That
Right.
kind of thing.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, I think that was good. That's perfect. I'm glad I got to get your insight on that as well. So now I am truly done with you. I'll ask for one more thing, just to get let's see. How can people get a hold of you and follow Risk, and if they want to listen? I'm sure the podcast is available, obviously, everywhere you can download podcasts. But anything you want to shout out, or so people can get a hold of you and keep up with you, and then I'll get a liner from you, and then I will let you get on with your day.
Of course, yeah. On Twitter, I'm at the Kevin Allison. And then on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, the show is at Risk Show. And then, like you said, you can download it, Risk, anywhere that, podcasts are downloadable. You can also find us at risk-show.com. And all of our storytelling training is at thestorystudio.org.
Awesome. Perfect. Yeah. I checked that out some, and I want to get back to that because I hope we'll have you back on, because I want to kind of probe a little deeper, and then I want to get your thoughts on presidential related matters and some other items. So we'll have to.
Well, I have been telling people that Risk right now for me is kind of a refuge, because we're living through such tumultuous times politically that I think it becomes even more important to hear the personal stories of, say, especially like women, people of color, Muslims, immigrants, trans people, anyone out there who, soldiers, people who have been imprisoned, people who have been homeless, it's kind of crucial for us, I think, as Americans who care about our communities and who care about other people, to really be like communing with one another, to be connecting and sharing. All right, let's take a break from the insanity of following the news and getting upset, and let's get together and remind ourselves who we are and what we're about.
No doubt. No, you're exactly right. Yes, through the power of storytelling and conversation, no doubt. So no, I really appreciate it once again. If I could just get you to identify yourself and say that you're a part of the vocal minority, and that's it. All I got for you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Hey, this is Kevin Allison of the Risk Podcast, and I am a part of the vocal minority.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Kevin. Have a great, great day. Thanks, man.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Hey, welcome back. Hope you really enjoyed that episode with Kevin Allison. I did. You know, I love storytelling, talking to storytellers, and I think we were able to get a little more insight into someone who compels people all the time and elicits a certain response from the audience. So much so that people are compelled to give their stories and also receive a certain type of blessing or nourishment or whatever that is that feeds their soul. So if you listen to this show, you know that I'm all about the power of liberation through conversation, connection, and being bold is liberating. So glad that we got to explore that and much more in this conversation with Kevin. Make sure you go check out the Risk Podcast. Links are in the show notes. Follow him. Check them out. Also, check us out. Go to iTunes. Leave a rating. Leave a review. That'll really, really help. That's seriously one of the fastest ways and best ways to help a show grow and give them some recognition. Also, go to our website. Take our survey. Our sponsors, potential sponsors, want to know who listens, why you listen, and just a little about you. It's quick. It's anonymous. Go to the store, check out a shirt, cop a shirt. I was in Sundance. I keep talking about that. We'll have more stories, but I was actually stopped at a party, and a famous composer really dug the fist logo that was on the front of my shirt, and I wanted one and bought one, and it was pretty cool. So, but anyway, so you can be like him or just support the show and cop a shirt. Really appreciate your support. Follow us on Twitter at Vocal Report. Send us an email, vocalreport@gmail.com. Like us on SoundCloud. Like us on Facebook, The Vocal Minority Report. Use the hashtag The Vocal Minority. Thanks for listening. We'll holler at you next episode. All power to the people. Peace.
This has been a Vocal Neighbors production.